So, what are you most excited in sharing about today, Lisa?
Hot pepper eating contest.
Fantastic. How about
What
for
are
you?
you most excited in sharing about today, Miss Donna?
I'm really excited about the civility index. So, it was a few years ago, there was a lot of conversation around the topic of civility. And why I'm excited is that we're looking at it not just civility, but also like how you get like even beyond that. You know what I mean? How about for you, Dr. Russ? What are you most excited about in this webinar?
I think it's just acknowledging that sometimes the things that are right in front of our face are the most important yet unrecognized. And so talking about connection from the perspective of individual health and performance as well as systemic health and performance. I think it's so well recognized and yet not recognized at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm excited to hear more from you around the medical or the health implications of relationships and even recognizing we're so limited in our understanding of well-being, or maybe it's thinking like it's very narrow, right,
Yeah.
in what we understand to be well-being. And the other thing that I was really intrigued, I'm excited to hear from our audience too as we start moving forward in a few minutes. We'll get started, but just people's understanding and perception of burnout, right? Because that's something that we hear a lot about in the workplace. And Lisa, I think you mentioned in a past conversation, maybe people are even getting fatigued of the word burnout. Like, oh my
Right,
goodness, I'm so tired of hearing about burnout.
right. Can we just call it something different so it's not so old?
Yes, yes. So we have that and a whole lot more. So, welcome everybody. We are talking about from burnout to belonging. And as you've heard, there are three of us that are going to be presenting today, and we've got some really amazing content. But before we get started with the content, we want to share with you a little bit about why this is so important to us. So I'm Donna Brighton. I'm going to be introducing my co-hosts, Lisa Grimes, and then Dr. Russell Greenfield. So, Dr. Russ, would you share with us a little bit about why this topic matters to you?
Well, thank you very much. This is a privilege to be before all of you and to work with my colleagues in this way. So I'm a conventionally trained physician and I practiced emergency medicine, was a department director and was in academics. But in the late 1990s, was very fortunate to be in the very first class of the program in integrative medicine, where there was an actual significant impact on my career because of the focus on connection and healing relationships. And so sitting across from patients in service, one of the things that's interesting is that space becomes really privileged. And that connection is critically important to how people do with regards to their health and well-being and whether they actually engage in taking care of themselves and following some of the recommendations we might offer. Building off of that, I ended up with a significant career in corporate wellness, including some time in Bentonville and working with different corporations around employee health and well-being. And one of the things that's interesting here is the entire space around burnout started with a focus on physician burnout. And
Mhm.
from there, it has expanded out to become an occupational phenomenon, regardless of your title. So one of the things that we bring to the fore here is that many, many companies are attending to health and well-being of their employees, but the one aspect that is almost always left out is the pro-social aspect, the opportunity to connect in meaningful ways that can actually contribute not just to health, but performance.
Fabulous. Lisa, tell us your why.
Oh, I could take up the whole rest of our time because there's so many reasons. For you and Russ, you both know kind of my nickname is Connection, and I love making friends. I love working to be a better friend. But I realized several years ago I had to friend myself first, and that made such a difference in how I could be a friend to others. And I think often we see that as being a personal friendship, but our work friends make such a huge difference. And I think about Russ in particular. We worked together. We didn't even know each other, and we met through work and became friends. And I think the value of work friends in helping us to enjoy our job. And there are just so many other benefits that we'll get into later today, like creativity and employee retention, drives me to help other people realize the power of friendship and what having meaningful connections can do for us mentally, physically, emotionally, and not the least of which is solving this loneliness epidemic.
That's fantastic, Lisa. So my why is personal and professional as well. I really have a core belief personally that true wealth is quality friendship. It's the people in your life that make all the difference. And I can unpack that and share so much more around that. But that for me has given a richness to life. And I am passionate about conveying that in a way that other people are inspired and want to build that same quality of richness into their life. In addition to that, I have been working in the corporate space for the last few decades in coaching as well as culture transformation. And over, what I see is leaders who want to make a change in their organization, but what they don't understand is that it comes down to people, right? People having conversations with each other, and those conversations lead to connection, and that connection creates the culture. So, all of this academic research and conversation about culture really comes down to relational connection. And then this topic, right, that we're going to be speaking about today in terms of well being is a further layer of the importance of those connections within the workplace. So, our agenda for the conversation today, we're going to talk about burnout. We want to hear from all of you in the audience, your thoughts about burnout. So, be considering what you or how you define burnout if you're frustrated with that term as well. And we're going to give you some science based research about burnout, what it comes from, why it exists, as well as the importance of friendship. We're going to talk about why well being is important, the incompleteness of many definitions of well being, and what we'd like all of you to consider adding as you think about well being in the workplace. We're going to share some actions. We're going to talk about our civility index and wrap it up with feedback from all of you. So let's get started. From the audience, I'd love to hear as you think about the word burnout, is there anything in particular that comes to mind? Any words, any observations, anything that you think of when burnout comes to mind? Yes, stress. Stress definitely can be a cause of burnout. Exhaustion, absolutely. And so it seemed I heard or saw some head nods earlier when I was asking about what your thoughts were on burnout. People were nodding their head like it's still really a thing. And I hear that as well frequently as I'm working in the organizational context with culture. It's just like, oh, we're overworked, we're burned out. Oh my goodness. And so, what we are talking about when we think of burnout is really the erosion of well being. And you can see here, well being isn't just, oh, I feel good today. That's hopefully something that comes out of it. But ultimately, it's really about all of these things, right? How are we doing when it comes to workplace well being? Yes, another word that came up from the chat was disassociation. Brilliant. And you'll see why in just a moment. So I just wanted a reflection as you think about burnout, however you define it, whatever extra words you use around burnout. How is burnout, or as we're stating, the erosion of well being, impacting the productivity, retention, and engagement in your organization? In other words, is this idea of erosion of well being reducing the productivity, reducing retention, and creating a situation where maybe you have less engagement? So that's a reflection question for all of you. So I wanted to talk about the impacts of the erosion of well-being. And there's some really amazing research, thinking about this. We all sort of sense and know that this idea of the erosion of well-being, it's a problem. But how big of a problem? Well, according to Harvard Business Review, it causes deaths. It creates an enormous cost to the healthcare system. And I found this statistic really fascinating. Lost productivity, $322 billion. because of this. So pretty significant impacts overall. Now let's think about the workplace impact. So for all of you engaged in ensuring that the workplace is a great place to be, these are some of the impacts for your people when they've experienced that erosion of well-being. So many of you are really passionate about ensuring that your employee engagement rises year over year and that people stay satisfied and engaged in the organization. And the reality is, when well-being's eroded, that doesn't necessarily happen. And you can see all of these other challenges, right? From lower team morale, higher healthcare costs, increased turnover, loss of talent. All of these things are impacts to your workplace when well-being is eroded. So, to the individual that was talking about disassociation, you can see here how well that connects to this definition. So there have been decades of research around what is burnout, or as we're talking about, erosion of well-being. And there's clarity from that research about the underlying causes. But when you think about the words, and you guys have done a brilliant job of coming up with that, these are the three characteristics of burnout: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, right? Kind of like, I'm just out of this, a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So that purpose, meaning are all essential for well being, and those don't exist when people are feeling this experience of the erosion of well being. So it results from prolonged exposure to stress, and it results in the collective feeling whenever we feel that burnout or erosion of well being, depletion, cynicism, or even hostile towards our job. And of course, a reduction in our ability to perform. So let's look at the root causes. Lisa, would you share with us a little bit about where does this erosion of well being come from?
Sure. I think, the most common one we all think of is what we have listed here is that workload. It's that prolonged stress of feeling just, I'm overworked, I have too much to do, and I am exhausted. We often think about, well, a lack of trust, perhaps a lack of fairness, or I'm never recognized. But one that we often miss is that we don't have a sense of belonging. We aren't feeling that we are really a part of the company. We feel we're showing up at the company. And there is such a huge difference in that, and more data, as you just cited one example of, Donna, has shown that. So let's look at what well-being is, because I think we often think of well-being as being our physical well-being. And of course, that's a part of it. And Dr. Russ, I want to hear your comments on that. But to me, it is so much more. If we are really looking at well-being, it is physical, but it's mental, it's social, it's our family, it's our financial, it is our spiritual, it's all of these aspects that tie into, are we living in alignment with what we value and how it impacts us? Russ, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Lisa. You spoke that eloquently and right on target. One of the challenges in the research space around wellness and well-being is exactly what you brought up, is how do you define this? And if you don't have a set definition, how can you actually measure the outcomes? And this has been one of the great challenges within the employee wellness, well-being space is, what are we measuring? What are our interventions? And how do we actually determine which outcomes might be prevalent across a wider range of the employed population? So this is actually critically important. There are more and more institutions coming together to try and develop a unified definition around this, largely to be able to push the research into what can actually help us with regards to wellness and well-being once we have an agreed upon definition.
Awesome. So thanks. I think it's Chitana. She said well-being of every aspect. So that's completely correct. There's so many dimensions as Dr. Russ talked about, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, right? These are all the dimensions, and it's a more full and complete definition of well-being than maybe you're familiar with. So I'd love for you to just pause and take a look through that and evaluate, where are you at, right? As you think about your own well-being, where do you stand? And the thing that's interesting that Lisa mentioned on the last slide is well-being isn't static, right? It's not like, check, I hit my well-being status and I'm good. It's always evolving and changing. So just recognizing that there's always opportunity for improvement. Nobody ever hits the well-being jackpot. But the reality is, there's a whole lot of things that make up well-being. And our focus, you can see here, is the bullet that talks about the experience of strong social support, belonging, and connection. That is a key and core element of well-being. And the reality is that's often overlooked, or in the workplace, a challenge to figure out, how do we make that happen? And it matters because well-being in the workplace leads to some really important things. And my guess is that many of you are already working to measure this, whether it's performance, engagement, retention, ultimately the success and sustainability of your business. This is key and core to the outcomes from well-being. And you can see here some of the research statistics where Gallup said employees who have that place of well-being, that feeling and experience of thriving, are 20% more productive. I mean, imagine that. We're all challenged to find the talent, to put the right people in the right roles. Oh my goodness, we need, more talent. But imagine if the talent that you have is productive at that higher level. And then they also said, at the same time, when people feel that sense of well-being, they're less likely to leave. So that's really key. Deloitte's report, or their research, shows 6 times higher engagement. And Harvard talked about the reality that when people are feeling a sense of well-being, there's lower healthcare costs, less turnover, and again, increased productivity. So pretty amazing when you think about the value, why well-being matters in the workplace. But as we've said several times, that during people's consideration of how do we think of workplace well-being, I've heard over and over, and I know May is Mental Health Month, and that's fantastic. It's so amazing that workplaces are considering that. And often well-being involves, hey, join your gym, or we're going to have a workout class. But what's missing is this idea of relationships. So I want to bust a couple workplace well-being myths, and I'm guessing many of you have believed them possibly. The first one is, and I've heard this, where, oh, I can't be friends with anybody in the workplace, right? If I'm a professional in the workplace, we can't be friends. But the reality is friendship or connection actually fuels performance. So encouraging friendship in the workplace is actually very valuable. And I'll tell you more about that in just a few slides. The second myth that we want to bust that you may be believing is the perks myth. And in my work supporting organizations as they're transforming culture, I've seen this idea of like, oh, we're going to, remodel and make everything really bright and open, and we're going to have free lunches and complimentary snacks, and we're going to have, if you guys remember the days of free beer and foosball on the break room, right? So this idea that somehow perks lead to well-being, and that's not the case. True well-being is not about the free food, even though that might get people to show up more frequently. The reality is well-being, a foundational element of well-being, is actually supportive relationships. So Dr. Russ, tell us about this crazy statement.
Well, it's really quite extraordinary that it's taken us this long to acknowledge how important connection is towards overall health and well-being. So Dr. Murthy made this statement a few years ago and it went viral, but interestingly enough, the World Health Organization has now come out with a very similar statement. And the idea here is, it's really intriguing to think that all the focus has been on, eat healthily, get exercise, manage your stress, all those kinds of things. And yet this idea that, connection really hasn't been in the equation with regards to health and well-being is actually amazing, that it's right in front of our face. and we haven't paid attention to it. And so for those who are listening, one of the questions that we would ask you to do right now actually is to ask yourself, pause, and consider, what are your relationships like? What is it like at work for you? What is it like outside of work for you? And keeping in mind that many, many people in the corporate sphere feel that, well, loneliness is simply the result of hybrid work or remote work. And that is not what the research shows, because it's very easy, unfortunately, to be lonely at work, even when you're surrounded by many coworkers. And if you wouldn't mind, please, Donna, going to the next slide. The risks of social isolation are becoming more and more recognized by people, not only in research, not only in science, but in business, and for all of us just outside of work. So one of the things that's interesting here is a lot of people hear about what's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And that HPA axis is something that is spoken about a lot with regards to stress and the stress response by the body. But it's more than just the stress response. Remembering that the human body is actually a system of systems. We have the cardiovascular system, the neurologic system, the digestive system. All these things do not work in isolation themselves. They work together, much like we work together in our corporate offices or our small businesses or in our communities. And so one aspect of any type of socialization can actually have a benefit or a detriment to the environment for everybody. And so the same type of thing happens within the human body. Any small benefit that we can have by being more connected, by being more supported, not only impacts our response to stress, but impacts our digestive tract, our cognitive function, our cardiovascular system. The impacts are actually beyond what might be considered readily recognizable, because in many ways, it's just the way that you feel. And that's critically important as well. So interestingly enough, social connection is a modifiable risk factor with regards to the development of disease across the lifespan, from teenagers all the way up to retirement and everybody in between. And Don, if I might ask you, because I want us to focus on the positive aspects here. So again, one of the things that's really critical here, you'll see some of the different ways that actually human connection can actually benefit us, both with regards to our health and our ability to perform well inside and outside of work. But what it really comes down to is that human connection is one of the most important aspects of each individual having a sense of their meaning and purpose. And that can be inside of work and outside of work. But it speaks so much to the work that you do, Donna, with regards to the culture of a workplace. And that idea of connection being everybody working towards a common goal and working together to achieve that common goal. And just as you spoke, Lisa, about having a sense of belonging, that I'm heard, that I am seen, and that contributes to something that's important to me, my sense of meaning and purpose, both inside of work and outside. And all of those things can actually positively impact a person's resilience, both physically and emotionally.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Russ. Whoops. So I want to kind of connect the dots here, because this was the title of our presentation, right? The whole point of moving from burnout, which we just talked about, the health risks, how burnout's actually the erosion of well-being. And now, Dr. Russ, you gave us an excellent point of awareness. Not only is burnout bad for work outcomes, but it's also really bad for health outcomes. So our antidote or solution for that is this idea of connection and belonging. And what's really powerful is that, as you can see here in the statement, it's a fundamental human need. It's not a nice to have. It's actually as essential as food and shelter, yet it's so neglected in how we think about it. And belonging is a word that you may have heard of, probably most of you have, but I'd like to create some definition around that. And this is a fantastic book written by Jeffrey Cohen. And when we think about the word belonging, just as you said, Dr. Russ, what exactly does that mean? Belonging answers the question, do I fit in? Do I matter? Does anybody see me? Do you notice me? When people experience that sense of belonging, it's transformative. And so these are some 4 research-based realities that connect us to belonging. So we feel a sense of psychological security, that's psychological safety that we all have learned about from Amy Edmondson's work. And if you know Google's work on, it's the number one reason for the success in teams is when people feel psychologically safe. So belonging helps me feel safe, which means that my team's going to be that much more productive. The next point is the social connection, right? So having relationships, identity and inclusion, right? Like being accepted for who I am. And finally, as you mentioned, Dr. Russ, in the last slide, the importance of purpose and contribution. So is the work I do important, and how does the work I do contribute to that greater purpose, that sense of contribution? So that's when we say the word belonging, that's what we think of belonging. And connecting that back to the workplace, it's the foundation of culture. So relationships and culture, right? So conversations lead to connection, or relationships which lead to culture. So all of this is critical when it comes to building your workplace culture. And you may be familiar with the Gallup research. They're a leader in the employee engagement space. And here's something I find really fascinating. In their Q12, that means 12 questions that they ask, or actually, I guess 13 when you look at it. One of the questions out of the entire group of questions they can ask, right? There's hundreds of thousands of questions you could ask somebody about their workplace experience. Question number 10 is, do I have a best friend at work? And that's really interesting if you think about it, because your goal in increasing engagement, wow, it connects back to having a friend at work. So hopefully you're seeing all of the dots connect as we walk through this information. So, an observation in the world today, it feels as though this has become our experience, where the incivility around us is outweighing the civility that we would like to see. So, can you relate to that? Do you experience that, whether it's in the world around you or possibly even in the workplace? Incivility is unfortunately more the norm. And I'm curious, if you think about it, on a scale of 1 to 10, whether it's your team or your organization, 1 being this is absolutely toxic, to number 10, we have a culture of courtesy and courage in that I work in. So curious, as you think about civility in the workplace, whether on the team you're with or the organization you work for, scale of 1 to 10, where do you fit? What do you think? So as you're typing numbers in there, I want to introduce to you the civility index. That's awesome. I'm seeing a lot of high numbers there, 8s and 9s. For some, not so good. So it's really interesting, right, to think about what's the level of civility in our organization. I want to address both, I don't know if it's Lena or Lina. She made a really interesting comment about friendship in the workplace is cultural specific, right? So people's expectations of the relational connection are different from one country to another. And I agree with you. And in fact, I think for some people, it can feel a little scary to ask that Gallup question of, do you have a best friend at work? Because people are like, what do you mean, do I have a best friend at work? How do you be friends at work? So we created something that we called the civility index, which what we wanted to communicate was that this is a continuum, right? So it's not about you have to be best friends, soul friends with every person in your workplace. That is not at all what we want to convey. And this connects into Shannon's comment, right? What does friendship look like in the context of work? So, yes, it's about the social connection, but it looks different for everybody. And we're completely with you, which is why we created what we call the civility index. So you can see here, there's 7 different levels of connection that we have kind of done some research on and believe that you progress through as you get closer to somebody. And our goal is not to say in the workplace, you have to be best friends with everybody, because we want to make sure that we answer that Gallup question affirmatively. The reality is that we want people to, number one, be civil in the workplace, right? So, this idea of civility and courtesy, I've heard so many times that in this day and age where people are being required or asked to come back into an office, They bring their laptop in, they sit at a desk, and they are in Zoom meetings and working on their laptop, and they're not engaging and interacting with people around them. That's what we're trying to shift. We want to create a greater level of civility and courtesy that moves into warmer civility, potentially into an emerging connection, and then into casual friendships. So we're not asking at the workplace that you become soul friends with everybody. But this civility index enables people to start thinking, where am I at? Am I even engaged with people in this way and having social connection? And it connects to our comment that well-being requires relationships. So whether it's at a level of civility, if it's a casual acquaintance, whatever that connection is in the workplace, all we're simply saying is that it matters. This is really, really important. So we've talked about the reality that burnout's true. It's a real thing in the workplace, and we're calling it the erosion of well-being. And we defined what well-being is, why it matters in the workplace and for your health, and the reality that that belonging can help address some of those challenges around the erosion of well-being. So, how do we increase belonging in the workplace? So, 5 simple steps. First of all, recognize wherever you are in your organization, there's an opportunity to show up and do something different. And then socialize the civility index so that people don't feel concerned about, oh no, I don't want to be best friends with everybody in the workplace. I'm not comfortable with that. No, actually, let's just think about starting with civility. So identify where you are and then consider whether people have the skills. I've heard this frequently, especially in various generations. I've done some work with a colleague around generational challenges. And generation to generation, people have learned different things in terms of their social connection habits. So there may be some skills gaps that can be filled in helping people create greater levels of civility and connection and then help people see their progress along that continuum. The other piece that we're passionate about is creating greater levels or creating greater opportunities for connection. And in the interest of helping people learn skills and create connection opportunities, we offer connection coach certification to provide resources in your workplace that are actually leading to transformation. So this is key because the Friendship Institute was created to support this process of developing greater levels of connection. And our goal is that everybody in the workplace would experience these strong social support, that they would feel as though they belong, that they're connected to other people. It doesn't mean every single person in the workplace, but somebody else in the workplace, so that they have a greater sense of well-being. So I mentioned creating a certified connection coaches. That is a passion of ours because while we do presentations and workshops, we want to see real transformation. And in my decades working in organizations, what I know to be true is that when you get grassroots involvement, people at all levels in the organization that are helping with that transformation and that shift, it creates lasting change. And that's our goal, is not to just embed ourselves, but in fact, to create opportunities for people in your organizations to learn the skills, the habits, the success secrets of greater levels of connection and belonging in the workplace. So, those are some of the things that we do, but we also want to share some tips with you of how leaders can increase belonging, because it's not just about all of the work that you do, but how does each and every person as a leader in the organization show up and play a role in increasing belonging? So, research based, there's a couple things that you can do. Small amounts of recognition make all the difference. So whether it's acknowledging contributions, like, I really appreciate that you did this. And we all know these things, right? I'm sure you teach this to your teams regularly about the importance of feedback, being positive and affirming their contribution and participation. But when that's done, I think sometimes people feel like, oh, that's an HR initiative. Does that really matter? Connect this to the data, right? The reality is when leaders are doing that, when leaders are acknowledging how people's contribution matters to greater purpose, it massively increases that person's feeling of belonging, connection, and value in the organization. And connecting back to my work in organizations, whenever we're focused on transforming a culture, one of the first measurements that we would always look at, because we'd start off with a measurement of where the culture is, what's going on. This idea of whether people understand how their work every day aligns to the greater purpose of the organization is fundamental. And that would be one of the first things we'd focus on, is helping people understand that. So it's simple, it's free. It's how do the leaders have a conversation and explain to people how their work matters and how it's helping achieve the greater purpose of the organization. So the last point, the last tip that we want to share, and there's a whole lot more that we could share with you, but how to increase belonging. And whether it's through connection coaches or through leaders actually creating opportunities for informal connection, that's what matters. So, Lisa, we would love to hear from you. Share with our audience your.
About hot
Yeah.
pepper eating. Are we passing out virtual hot peppers?
We should. That would be
Yeah.
fun. Little bottles of hot sauce for everyone.
Yes. Well, many years back, I left a very toxic culture for my first CEO role. And one of the things that I knew, although I wish I'd had all this data and research that we now have access to, was that I wanted a culture where people did feel seen and heard and feel like they belonged. And I wanted a culture of connection. And I'll date myself when I say this role was right as Friday afternoon happy hours are getting to be a big thing. And I just thought, you know what? Not everyone wants to participate in a happy hour. I just thought, surely there has to be a better way. And so I asked all the employees what they would like to do, because I wanted to, again, didn't call it the civility index because I didn't have it then, but move people along in developing some fun relationships if they wanted to participate. Because, little side note, mandatory, you're going to come in here and eat this now is really not a good way to increase belonging and connectedness. Well, it turned out that eating hot pepper eating contest won the day. Well, I didn't, like anything hotter than like black pepper, but I am highly competitive. So I learned how to eat hot peppers, and it grew to the point that the one story that I don't think I'll ever forget is the one of our employees that ran our IT division was based in our Atlanta office. And of course, all the different offices around the world could do the same thing. And we didn't have virtual back then either because of how long ago it was, but we kept everyone informed. And Big Mike said, could I just stay and work there on Friday and come home Friday night, like stay after hours to participate, because I'm going to challenge you because I can out eat you. And, well, Big Mike and I wound up being the last two in the contest, and we had to keep eating until like one of us passed out. And Big Mike just kind of dropped, and Big Mike had earned his name. And I'm like, but to this day, I mean, we had clients that heard about it because it was just part of something we did as camaraderie. People that didn't want to eat hot peppers would come and watch because we wanted to develop connections. And then not only did it spread amongst our employees, it spread to our customers. I would go to a client meeting and there would be like a whole thing of hot sauces just waiting because people had heard, oh, you all do this fun thing. And so I think in my mind, helping people, like, we have to know our teams well enough to find out what would work for them, what is helpful in their idea of making connections, and then work within that and being, I think, also being flexible. It isn't the one size fits all. And to your point, Donna, we're not trying to say everyone has to be a best friend, because you don't mandate friendships. We as leaders can create environments that encourage and support it, and we will see the benefits. I believe that all the data is showing, but it's listening. And as you and Russ have both heard me say, a good friend who's written a lot of books on listening is listen fully first. So that means we need to get to know those around us well enough to know what matters to them. And it will reap huge rewards. I have seen it. And Russ, we have lived some of it together, not at that company, but at other companies. And to this day, I can tell you, this was a company that I led back in the 90s. A lot of these people work together. Several of us have done 4 different companies together because we created those bonds and those connections.
That's awesome, Lisa. I love that story because it's such a powerful example of how you don't have to follow what everybody else is doing. You just have the conversation with your employees and then your advice about listening to them and what matters to them. And what a fun outcome.
Well, as we have said, if people are going to feel connected, it's going to have to be sincere. It's going to have to be meaningful and thoughtful, and it isn't going to be a mandate. It's going to be the way we live and the way we exude our energy as leaders. And a lot of that goes back to friending ourselves first, because we have to feel good about who we are and how we show up to work. And then we can help those around us feel supported and connected when they come into work or when we are working with each other. I mean, Donna, I think about some of the first work we ever did together. We worked together for a few years before we ever even met in person, but we connected camaraderie via remote work
Mhm.
because we were able to have some meaningful conversations.
Mhm. For sure. So our goal really, as you've beautifully said, Lisa, is really helping workplaces become more human, increase their belonging, and improve their retention, their loyalty, the contribution or productivity of their people. And we believe this statement, right? So how do you shift people in your workplace from feeling unseen, unsafe, and unsupported to a place of connection and belonging? And that's so key as we think about the value and importance of well-being and how that makes a difference. So putting it all together, we talked about the importance of moving from burnout to belonging. And we just hope all of you understand now through the work that we shared that connection is truly the foundation of well-being. So if you have things that support your people in their physical well-being, their mental well-being, that's great. But what are you doing to support them from a connection perspective? Makes such a difference. So, the surprising secret that we were wanting to share with all of you is the secret to overcoming burnout is really about belonging, and it makes such a difference. Anything you wanted to add to that, Lisa?
Well, Donna, I would say we hopefully have shared something that resonated, and it might be different for each of the people, but um, next week, I believe July 30th, is International Friendship Day. And I think we always like to end with, like, what is one practical takeaway from what we've heard? Wouldn't it be great to think of someone that we could reach out to in our workplaces between now and International Friendship Day and try to move somewhere along the civility continuum? Try to help someone feel like they belong and realize that we're doing ourselves and them a favor because we're improving our well-being and we're probably improving our company's productivity as well.
Absolutely. Yes. So next steps in terms of what happens now. So we would love to hear from all of you who had a chance to hear this message and help us understand who else would benefit from hearing this message. We're passionate about connecting 10 million people over the next years because connection makes a difference, as we've shared with you. And so we'd love to hear if there's anybody that you know in organizations, in associations, who else can we share this message with? So we'd love to hear from you about that. And then how did this resonate? Was there something that you would take away, any value that you got? Please share that with us in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And then we would be delighted to pass that civility index along with you. It's spelled out in a little bit more detail with some behaviors, et cetera. So we'd love to share the civility index, notes from our presentation, as well as the recording in case you wanted to pass that along to anyone. So if you didn't sign up, because we'll be sharing that with everybody who signed up on the link. If you did not sign up, be sure to let us know that you're interested in those things so we can pass them along. And then I'd just love to hear, is there anything that we can do to help as you're thinking about your challenges, whether it's introducing well-being to the leadership in your organization, bringing greater levels of social connection and practices into your organization, or even evaluate and consider getting some connection coaches certified. So we would love to help and support your organization, the people in your organization, increase their well-being, increase their levels of belonging and connection. And so I just wanted to acknowledge some of the comments. Thank you so much. There was a comment that many of the burnout solutions are extra things to do, and that this is so much better and more powerful to recognize we can just do this as part of our everyday, that you don't need to layer on more and more programs on top of what's already happening. So again, we'd love to share the content with you and anybody else that you feel would be valuable. Shannon, thanks for your comment as well, that this is a more holistic approach, that well-being is a priority for many. In fact, Dr. Russ, we were having that conversation. There's actually a role being added to some organizations, which is a chief wellness officer, and that organizations are looking for how to increase that overall level of well-being in an organization, and often overlook this very basic social connection. How do we build better relationships? So thank you all for your participation. Love your comments. Keep those coming in. And with that, I just want to say a great big thank you from the Friendship Institute. We're thrilled to be serving the world and helping bring greater levels of social relational connection and increased well-being to the world. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. And you have a wonderful rest of your day.